In the service from...
What branch as well?
I was in the United States Army, infantry branch. I was in the United States Army from 1965 to 71, 72. It was 7 years.
That's a stint.
7 years, and I retired after 7 years as a captain.
Okay. Cliff, how about you?
Well, I had 4 years as a cadet and 30 years in the Air Force. I ended up retiring as a colonel. And I also had a bonus. I spent 1 year as an exchange officer with the Royal Air Force
That's
in
interesting.
England.
Yeah. So you, and how about your actual military service time? Were you in Vietnam period?
I was commissioned in '64, and I left in '94.
Okay, okay.
So I span all the way through the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
Oh, you had quite a series there. Tim, how about yourself?
I was in from 2003 to 2009, and I came out a corporal, and
What branch?
I was in the Marines,
Marines, United States Marines?
and I was a radio operator in communications. I remember the night before I left, I was both excited and scared, but I was not nearly prepared for what I was showing up to.
The Marine Corps success depends upon teamwork. Therefore, teamwork will be an essential part of your training here at Parris Island. The words I, me, or my will no longer be a part of your vocabulary. You will use words such as this recruit, that recruit, these recruits. Do you understand? Yes, sir! Passing through these hatches symbolizes your transformation from a civilian to a United States Marine.
And I just remember they gave me the most painful haircut I've ever had. I had hair about this long, and they just buzzed it all off, and they nicked my hair so that I was bleeding, and I was standing in formation. I just remember the blood ran down my nose and hit the floor, and they just started yelling at me for vandalizing government property. And I said, man, I don't know if I'm gonna last this long here, but I survived, and I'm proud.
And how do they do it?
With me, it was they took all my civilian attire, and I guess I'd describe it best as very coldly gave you government property, which was your uniform, your fatigues. And there's a lot of yelling, a lot of chaos, and if you're confused about something, it's not like the RMV you're gonna ask. You don't wanna ask, you're just hoping that nothing goes wrong. And eventually it's just, you start following the herd, and eventually the herd forms into something, and you start learning, courtesies and how to march and how to shoot and how to say yes sir, no sir, and one day they give you an EGA in your hand and you say welcome aboard, and it's one of the proudest days of my life.
Cliff, how about you? How was the transition for you to military life?
Yeah, it was total and instantaneous. I did recall, though, something. After I'd been there about 6 weeks, we were having a shower formation where you're standing up against the wall in your shower clogs and your towel, and you're being harassed, and if things slow down, they make you do sit-ups or push-ups or whatever. When I got to be an upperclassman, I found that my niche was squats, so I would make the cadets do squats because I could do more than they could. But anyway, this upperclassman puts his nose right in front of my nose and says, "Are you putting out 100%, mister?" And I said, "No, sir." And he says, "What? Why was that?" And I said, "If I was putting out 100%, you wouldn't have asked me." And he immediately walked away. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see he was laughing.
Officer's basic course, which was not, which had a lot of good information. It wasn't particularly rigorous. There was the airborne school, which was fairly rigorous.
Yes.
And didn't have a lot of subsequent application to me, but I'm glad I'm glad I went through it. And the others were more specialized. An introductory course for advisor duty, and a jungle warfare school. So And I also had a tour as a basic training officer, and I think teaching the basic training and being an officer for the basic training, I think you were really kind of participated in it, and so I kind of got my basic training long after I was in. And
Didn't. So I think that a lot of training is about making you part of the group, making you understand that you're special, and making you understand that you're not going to let the side down. You're going to do what has to be done.
They taught you 3 things how to do at Parris Island was run and exercise, shoot your M16, and march. And they succeeded at that at Parris Island. Now, after I got out of the Marines, they sent me down to Lejeune, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where we stayed and did combat training down there for a month. That was where we started to use the heavy weaponry, which I was a radio operator, so I wasn't going to get the same expertise to that kind of firepower that an infantry guy was getting, but they exposed it. And after that, we then shipped out to 29 Palms, California, which is where I got my specialty training, which was as a field wireman and radio operator. And there, I mean, I thought physical exercise was tough at Parris Island. That was worse than Parris Island was, because then they're having you run with your boots and your fatigues on for 7-mile runs in the mountains. And but it all had a purpose, and you built that camaraderie, and you had that sense that you were never going to quit no matter what they did to you.
What did you see differently from the military culture from the civilian culture?
Excuses is the biggest one.
I mean, what regard?
You can go into the civilian world and show up to work 10 minutes late and say, oh, you know, traffic was a real pain in the ass today. If you showed up at a military event late, you were considered absent without leave.
I think that there's a lot of civilians who are pretty sharp, but then I think there are some civilians, as Tim says, they're an excuse-a-day kind of people. And so, yes, most civilians are out there, and if we had to call them up, we'd be proud of them. But there are some that just, they're skating.
How about you? How would you?
I'm not sure if it's so much military people versus civilian people, but maybe civilian people who are in the military and adapt to that environment and to those requirements. Now, some of them don't, but if you're in the military, you learn, as Tim indicated, that there are certain situations where you just can't make any excuses, but where they can really be your performance, your on-time performance, really can be life or death. So I knew I was on my way. So I had that, but I had a very brief tour with MACV. I think I was only in country less than a month before I was evacuated, and then I went back again. A couple of years later.
So what was your original role? What was your assignment, and where were you sent?
I was originally sent to north of Way with the 1st Armored Division as an assistant battalion advisor. And my next tour, which was my longer tour, which was the year and a half that I spent there, was with the Americal Division, which was headquartered at Chulai.
Okay.
In the
and
northern
what
part
was your role there with them?
I had a tour I had a 6-month tour at the division headquarters in the Tactical Operations Center, another approximately 6-month tour at the Brigade Tactical Operations Center, and then my last tour was with one of the infantry battalions as the S2.
Okay. S2 meaning?
S2 responsible for battalion level intelligence, which was mostly reconnaissance, patrolling, going out on some of the operations with the units.
How about your particular experience? Where did you get sent, your first assignment, and what was your role going to be?
Oh, so I'd gone through pilot training. I was in at Craig Field in Selma, Alabama, the cultural center of the Deep South. I was there during the march to Montgomery, except we were restricted to base, so we didn't get in any trouble. And then I went out to Tucson for F4 training, backseat pilot. And one day, we were pretty close to graduating, and the director of operations, a colonel, Chappie James, who most people probably don't know, but Chappie was the first black four-star in the U.S. military. So Chappie calls us in and he says, "You lucky SOBs, you're going to Vietnam right after we send you down to Tampa for 6 months."
September of 2005, I found out we were going to the Al Anbar province in Iraq to support combat operations in Fallujah. Every unit has to go through Mojave Viper, which was a training operation in 29 Palms, California. It's a huge mount city. I mean, it's a city made of stone, and that's it. There's nothing else in it, but it's big. And you do your training exercises there. And we landed in country in March of 2006. And I remember I got kind of, because I was part of H&S Company, which was getting all the communications equipment put in the HESCO barriers that would meet us in country. I got kind of removed, like yourself, from the main body. And I remember we touched down into a place called Camp Victory, and me and 10 other guys walk in there, and I don't know what rank he was. I'm assuming he was a staff NCO. Pretty much said, "Oh, you guys just land?" We're like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay, we're just going to give you a little tour of the place." And so they're showing us a place. It's got a room with Xboxes, pool, even had a soda machine. And I'm sitting there going, "Well, this ain't going to be that bad." And somebody sits there and goes, "We're the 25th Marine guys, right here." They're like, "Oh, you're not here. You're coming with us." So the other guy who brought us around said, "Oh, where are you guys going?" They're like, "You're getting in the 7 tons." So we get in the 7 tons. It goes out, "You're going to Fallujah." And he just goes, "Oh, good luck, guys. Give them hell." And that's when I kind of was like, "Oh, I guess we're not staying here." So we rolled into the night we got there. We came in a convoy, I'd say about 3 7 tons deep with 2 Humvees in front. And it was just, I just remember hearing live fire and bombs going off, and I was like, all right, this ain't home anymore. I'd say the guys I was with, I was happy to be going over there with them. You know, we had, I thought they were all competent guys, and they all would have my back. The indigenous population, it was, the way I would describe it is like being in a different planet. They weren't Americans. I was so used to my life seeing Americans, and this was a group of people who, outside of being human, we have different experiences of life.
The climate was, as Cliff was saying, it rained a lot, it was hot a lot, although sometimes we were in the northern part of Vietnam, and there were times when it actually got a little bit chilly. You could, I think there was I remember even a little thin film of ice on the rice paddies at one time. So we did break out the field jackets once in a great while. Thinking of 2 categories of Vietnamese people. One would be the ones that we worked with. The so-called Vietnamization program had started then, so we were doing a lot of joint operations with ARVN units, and we had some Vietnamese assigned to us. I had a person with me that they referred to as a Kit Carson Scout. And these were Viet Cong who were repatriated and were assigned to American units to, you know, I do a little scouting and do a little basic translating. The area that I was in was pretty rural. You know, there were some villages and a city that we got into once in a while, but they were pretty rural. They lived in basically huts, which were referred to by Americans as hooches. They all had little bomb shelters dug into the cellars, and I would say it was a part of the country that had really been fought over since the French were there fighting the Viet Minh. There probably wasn't much of a break between that and when the Viet Cong started causing problems. So I would say they were kind of weary and wary at the same time.
When you say
as far as the troops were concerned, you know, I think they. You know, I think they generally, you know, performed pretty well. I think they had a good sense of duty, and I think that they had a sense that you know, being part of the unit and doing their job was, you know, not only a way of, you know, accomplishing the mission, but probably the best way to survive too. And there was really kind of a strong sense of you know, trying to take care of each other.
I can remember being in the night flare pattern up over North Vietnam, pushing the throttle up on the front seater, who was a staff guy from down in headquarters, because he was letting the speed bleed off. On my second tour, I would have pushed it up 50 knots sooner. So I only had one real combat experience in which we had to react. I was flying with Archie Lawrence in the Real Arch, and we were escorting an EB-66, and 2 or 3 MiG-21s fell in amongst us, and we had to dogfight them, and we went through about 3 tons of fuel and had accomplished nothing, and then we all went home.
I went home. How long were you subject to that stress for that dogfight?
I'd say about 10 or 11 minutes. Yeah. And we fired off 6 missiles, achieved nothing, except we learned that the missiles, the Sparrow missiles, wouldn't work tail on the MiG-21, and we also picked up something about how the Sidewinder missiles, if you flew them through a thunderstorm, you could roll the tape back that would jam the guidance vanes. That wasn't a lot of fun. But
one night in particular, the combat engineers that were located at the opposite end of Camp Baharia, which was about a half mile away from Fallujah, they wanted to do some night operations, setting up towers for the snipers, and they asked for a couple of radio operators to go and help them out. I was the bottom guy at the time in terms of rank, so they sent me to go, and we just showed up, and I just remember there was always sounds of explosions and gunfire all over the city, but you kind of got a sense this time that it was getting closer and closer, and they told us to stop what we were doing and get ready. You have to deal with loss, and for somebody that you knew was either seriously wounded or killed, or did you have to deal with own personal injury for yourself? I was fortunate. All my friends came home. However, I did know of one individual, Sergeant Matthew Fenton. He was an acquaintance. I did training with him. I knew who he was, and he didn't come back.
And what were the circumstances?
He had a suicide bomber drive into his Humvee and killed him. You know, it was just one of those. He was one of the first guys we lost over there, and I remember that was well, this is for real. You know, it was always for real, but that was the first time that you're like, wow, this was a guy that was in training like me. We had to go through the same training. I'd seen him on training exercises, and it's like, well, that could be me, and that kind of was about a month or two in, and that really kind of made, I think for me, it got more tense, as opposed to when you're there and you're just waiting and it's quiet.
Cliff, how about you? Did you have to deal with loss or injury at all in your time?
No unit I was in, the whole time I was in the Air Force, lost anyone, except we had a technicality. My last flight was an F-4 backseater. My front seater was getting a check ride, I wasn't. And we were going into France, and the check pilot, the flight examiner, we had to let down through a cloud deck, and he tried to roll around us for separation, stalled the airplane. And the backseater on that airplane made it by half a second. Front seater missed it by half a second.
Ejection?
Ejection, yeah. So that changed my attitude towards how you deal with low altitude emergencies, because the front seater said eject to the back seater. If he had just ejected, they both would have gone, might have both lived.
That quick?
That quick.
You had you were injured as well, right?
I was, yeah.
Can you explain what happened? How it occurred?
It happened on my first tour. It happened on my first tour. We were walking down a trail, and something blew up in front of us. A minor booby trap, we assume.
And what happened? What was the injury?
I was evacuated, and I had some injuries to my legs, and the real problem I had was that an infection set in, and it took them a long time to control it. So they eventually had to kind of fuse my knee together, and it really hasn't limited me very much. I was able to go back for another tour.
That's amazing.
Would I regret, would I do it again? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. I've learned things about myself, and that I never thought I would be able to overcome. And it has been a motivating factor for me still to this day, and how I live my life. I feel like I have to maintain the reputation of the United States Marine Corps in everything that I do. And you can't, in my opinion, get that from a college degree.
Living the Army values means you live up to higher standards. All of us know the meaning of the words loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. These are the 7 core Army values, and the soldiers learn them in detail during basic combat training. From then on, they live them every day in everything they do. But how often and how many of us do see someone, not a soldier, actually living up to them? Not many, I would say. Why? Because these values teach you to live caring for others, not only for yourself. These values teach you to be responsible before your country, your family, your friends, and people around. We all enjoy the rights, but how about the duties? People prefer to forget their duties and cherish their rights. On the contrary, being a soldier is more than being responsible. It's sacrificing yourself for something greater than yourself. At the same time, the soldier, above all of us, prays for peace, for it's him who sees all the horror, cruelty, and destruction of any war.